Hey everyone, it's Cam here, welcoming you to another episode of The Build Room. This week we're going to be fully rebuilding the front steering assembly on our RA23 Toyota Celica, aka Violet Crumbles. So stick around and check it out. Okay, so we're back, and in last week's episode we ran through the rear end of Violet Crumbles. We got it nice and tidied up and fully rebuilt all of the drum and brake assembly. The one thing that I wasn't really happy with from that episode was the quality of the braking hardlines. So since then I have gone through and tidied all of those up, actually painted them. I painted them a Shogun grey, I think it was, which is kind of like a gunmetal grey. It's just a little less green, which should look neat without standing out too much, is exactly what we wanted. In fact, I'm actually going to paint both of the sway bars in the same color, just so that they don't sort of drag your attention down to the underside of the car whenever you're looking at it. I find having really brightly colored underbody things just distracting from the car overall. I mean, it's horses for courses, and that's only my own personal opinion, but it's not what I wanted for this car. So now we can get stuck into that front steering assembly. Now, in the episode where we pulled it out, I went through at really high level detail how some of that assembly worked. But in this episode, having it all out of the car gives me the opportunity to throw it on the bench and run you guys through all the important stuff and the things that we want to pay attention to now so that it makes our job reassembling a lot easier. And basically that just means getting everything back on the same way that it came off, including down to the clearances and the measurements for the adjustable componentry like the tie rod ends and the Castor rods and things like that. So I've got all those steering componentry on the bench now and roughly assembled, ready to go, but I am having a bit of a problem with getting the right camera angle. So the first thing that we're going to have to do here is build a mount. Will do. I don't think that's quite level. Okay, so even though this is only a temporary fixture, I think if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing well. So I'm actually going to use a spirit level to make sure I get this thing dead straight. All right, now we just need a secure mounting mechanism for the camera. Snipping off the cable ties indicates really high quality work here. Okay, so I think that's about as good a shot as we're going to get. You can see here what I've done is taken the two lower control arms and just screwed them into some wood which is clamped to the desk. Those would normally have the cross member between them, so they sit into the underside of the cross member. So these are a fixed distance apart and never move. And attached to the lower control arms is the Castor rods here. Now what those do is basically allow you to, within a small margin, move the lower control arms forward and backwards. Now that's not designed to get you huge amounts of caster, but what it is meant to do is just correct any alignment issues. So if you have a small bingle or if there's something not quite right from the factory, you can adjust these arms here to bring everything back to true and get a good alignment. Now at the end of the lower control arm is a ball joint which the steering knuckle attaches to, and the steering knuckle has some stops on it just to limit its range of movement. And then at the end of it is a tie rod end. That tie rod end joins into the tie rod and another tie rod end which connects into the relay rod or the track rod or the center rod or any one of a bunch of different names. And then on the left hand side of the car, for the Australian domestic market, obviously in the US this is reversed, but we have our idler arm here, and we've actually gone through and rebuilt an idler arm, not this one, but rebuilt an idler arm in a previous episode, which I'll link to in the top right of the screen now. And then on the other end of the relay rod, we have the pitman arm, which attaches to the steering box, and then back into another tie rod end, tie rod, and tie rod end for the other knuckle. Okay, so basically the way this works is that the steering componentry here, which is fixed onto either of the chassis rails, can rotate to the left or the right as you turn the steering wheel. So if we rotate it left, we move that way, And if we rotate right, we're moving that way. And if you watch the ends of the knuckles here, picture you had the strut connected on top of here and then a disc out here. When we move that steering arm, those two knuckles move left and right in unison, and they would turn the wheels of the car. So, in order to make sure this drives somewhat reasonably without having to go to the effort of doing a string alignment or anything like that, the easy way to do this is just to try and get everything back into the way it was aligned when it came off the car. It did drive relatively straight the last time I drove it, so I'm not too worried. It should be enough to get it to an alignment shop to get it all properly done. If yours is already apart and you haven't done this, don't worry too much. You can do a string alignment once you've got it back together. It's just that string alignments aren't really accurate enough, or I wouldn't trust them long-term on my car. So if it's just a case of something to get us through until we get down to an alignment shop, I'd rather just measure these out and make sure they're the same when I put them back in. Obviously with new tie rod ends and new bushes and things like that, it is going to shift a little bit, but hopefully not enough that's going to cause us any terminal wheel wobbles or anything like that. So the things that we have to worry about is the adjustment on the Castor rods. So they bolt in a fixed position down this end, but at this end, we need to make sure that this nut here doesn't move forwards and backwards because that will pull the lower control arm forward or push it rearward in the car. The other thing we need to make sure that we get right is just the length of the fully assembled tie rods. So these tie rods here, what we're going to do is firstly put the new arms next to the old arms just to make sure they're actually the same, because we don't want to pull this all apart and then find we've got the wrong parts. But then once we've confirmed that they're exactly the same, all we need to do is measure the amount of thread that is showing from the tie rod. And then when we reassemble it, we just make sure we have that same amount of thread showing on the new one. And that should be close enough. If it's not, then we'll have to do a string alignment, but hopefully we get through it without needing to do that. These things here sticking up are actually the mounts for the sway bar. These will be replaced and they'll have new bushes, but there's nothing really to align here. You're just bolting these in. It's a non-adjustable on the standard one. My replacement one is adjustable, so it has a slightly different mounting mechanism that we're not going to worry about today. So once again, if you're watching, steering left, steering right. So this arm here, the pitman arm, which is attached to the steering box, this is the only one doing the work. So realistically, the idler arm is exactly that. It sits idle. All it does is keep the relay rod at the right height and allow it to move without coming off its axis or plane. So this right hand one is doing all the work and it just pushes left and right. Now if these aren't in alignment, you'll get one wheel towed out more than the other and the car won't want to drive straight. It usually gets steering wobbles and things like that, which are no good. So the rebuild of this is going to consist of new ball joints, new tie rod ends, new bushes on the Castor rods, new bushes in the lower control arms, and that rebuilt idler arm that we had before, and a brand new pitman arm. Okay, so now that the science lesson's out of the way, let's get these disassembled and then we can get them cleaned up and get some new parts on. Okay, so we can start by taking the idler arm off, which was just on there temporarily for the demonstration. That's actually off an RA23 that I have, just in case anyone's wondering. It's actually in pretty reasonable nick. Moves pretty good, and this ball joint is not too bad. I'm probably still going to end up rebuilding that before it goes back onto that car though. And similarly with the tie rod ends, I took them apart when I first disassembled this. So they're just temporarily held in. And again on this one, just had a Castor nut on it, finger tight. And it'll drop away too. Put this to the side for now. Okay, now these sway bar mounts are also just finger tight, so I'll drop those out as well. And I'll be able to get that out once I unscrew it from the base. And then the Castor rod bolts. Now, these can be really tight, so we're going to put a bunch of ugga-duggas on them. Okay, so they're both cracked now. And if we flip this over now, we'll be able to get to the nuts on the back. They're not captive, so we'll need to put a spanner on those. And 2. So castor rod there. This is the important distance of thread here. So I'm going to measure that out and mark it as the passenger side lower control arm. And then I'll make sure that once this is all cleaned up and powder coated that we reset this back to roughly that position. And then we have the ball joints. Okay, top nut off. Now we've got to get these two apart. Alright, so knuckles off. We'll pull off the dust boot. That can go in the bin. This ball joint tidied up a bit more just so we can see what we're doing and so I don't get covered in grease while I'm trying to get this out. Then you can see the ends of the snap ring here and here. So we've got to lever these apart so that the split ring comes out and then we can drive the ball joint down through. Easiest way to do this is just with a pair of reasonably strong, I would use my circlip pliers, but they're really not tough enough for these. So we'll lever it out with the proper needle nose, get a flathead under it. It doesn't matter if we break this or bend it. Like I said, it's all being replaced. Once we've got one corner out, just a case of ripping it off. There we go. Okay, so there's 2 ways now that I can try and get this off. The first is my press. And in order to use the press, it's going to be difficult to get any pressure on here. So what I'm going to do is cut the ball joint off at the top here if I can. And then what I'm going to try and do is, if I can set it up in the vise, I'll actually try to press it out using the vise first. And then if that doesn't work, I'll graduate to the other one. And then the third stop in this saga is actually to hire a ball joint removal tool. I'm going to try with this first and then resort to plan B if I need to. Okay, so now with a couple of, I think if I just put a couple of bolts in here, I only really have to put enough pressure on this to crack it. So with a couple of bolts in there, I'll be able to put these in the vise and the top of the ball joint in the vise, and then we'll see if that will pop it free. This looks very sketchy, but I'm going to put some safety glasses on just in case these ping out at a high rate of knots. And then we're going to give it a shot. All right, let's just get a look in here to show you. All right, so if we come in here and look from the top, you can see here we have a gap forming. So the ball joint is being pushed out of the keeper there. So that's looking good. What I am going to do is just put a cloth over this. I'm just worried if these fire out, they could do some damage. So I'm just going to lay a cloth over here and give it a couple more cranks and see if we get it all the way out. Oh, that is so close. All right, I think now that I've broken the seal, I might just be able to tap it out with the hammer now. So we'll back it off again, safe and sorry. Oh. Great success. We are out. That was tight. That leaves on the lower control arm this bush. Okay, now that is a rubber bushing with a metal insert. You can see the tooth on the metal insert there, and it basically is larger on one side than the other. It gets pressed in this way. Now, the bushes that I've got, which are a Super Pro urethane bush, they basically go inside the original housing for this bush. So the good news there is that we don't have to press the bush out of this. in terms of the metal housing that sits around the outside, because a standard bush, and I'll throw up a picture of a standard bush, but a standard bush, this would have been a softer rubber, and there would have been a metal housing on the outside, and then the crush tube in the middle. So what we do have to do to this one though is take out the inner metal crush tube and take out the rubber. So I'm just going to cut the rubber as much as I can, and then once we've cut the sides off this rubber, hopefully I'll be able to get a decent grip on this inner tube and pull that out. If not, I will press that out with something else in the vise. And then once that's all clear, this will be ready to be tidied up and coated. You can see a little bit more clearly that this edge here, this is the outer edge of the bush housing. So this is what we're trying to retain, and all this rubber here needs to go and this pin needs to come out. So that's probably still stuck there. Yeah, it's not going anywhere. So rather than try and beat this end of the control arm, which is still pretty sturdy, it'll hold up to it, but I think again we're probably better off to try and press this out. Okay, everything's lined up. All right. Okay, that's not going to take too much more to get out. And with the right combination, we will find something that is, yep, of a decent length, so that we can push that out. There's got to be easier ways to do this, but they all involve things that I don't have lying around the garage at the moment. And I don't really want to advocate having to buy a bunch of tools to do every job on this channel. So, you know, I have a pretty decent collection of tools. You know, it's not a mechanic set or anything, but I do have a fair few tools. And I know the pain of having to buy a new tool every time you want to do a new job on a car. And oh, if everyone can avoid that, that would be great. Okay, so garage hack. We'll be able to see this quite well as it comes out. All right, so just holding this in place, and you'll watch that rubber bush push out. And the only thing I will say here is that my vise is quite a big one. It wasn't expensive. It's just a 150mm offset vise from Bunnings. But if you're trying to do this with smaller vices, you just need to be careful, because you can get into a situation where you break the bolt. There's basically a metal rod that runs through the vise, and you can break that if you are trying to use it as a press, which is not really meant to do. So, you know, you get away with it when you're doing small stuff like this. I wouldn't be trying to substitute a vise for a hydraulic press in all situations. Okay, let's see where we are. All right, we're out. The only thing that I have done is slightly wedge my socket in there with a bit of rubber, but I'm sure, again, the persuader will get that out for me. Pop that there. All right. And that is out, good as gold. So that surface in there, there's a little bit of corrosion in there. Just light surface rust, there's no pitting or anything. So I'll tidy that up as I clean all the rest of this up. And this will be powder coated, but we're pretty much now done with that piece. Which means now we can move our way on to the Castor rods. So I'm not going to need to tear this down in front of you guys, but I will just quickly say the main things that I'm going to try and replicate are the distance from the back of this bolt to the end of the thread, which is about 11mm at the moment. And it's not going to be an exact science, because these bushes will be changed, which is going to change a bunch of different measurements. But in the end, I'm just trying to get it close enough, as I said, to be able to drive around the block without having any shakes and get it safely down to an alignment shop to get a proper alignment. But one thing I did want to point out is that if I look at the 11mm here and I compare it to the other caster rod, you can see that there is a significant difference there in terms of how far out they are done. Now, it could be that there's a misalignment with the car, or this may have been out of alignment to start with, but it didn't feel like it was. But I'm going to put these back to where they are now, because there is something here that, say, I don't know, at some point one of these rods was slightly bent or something else was, and this has had to be adjusted. I'm just going to replicate that and put everything back in the same space. Okay, so with the lower control arms out of the way and the caster rods taken care of, the last thing to do is the steering assembly itself, including that relay rod and the tie rod ends. So we're going to bring back the tie rod ball joint separator that we had before. Unfortunately, this is too small to work on those lower ball joints, but it'll be fine for the steering assembly. And we're just going to break all those apart first, and then I'll show you what we need to measure on the tie rod assemblies. Okay, so now we'll take out this split pin and remove the castle nut. Right, so this one wasn't in good shape to start with. As you can see, we've busted that rubber open. These can be used to take off a tie rod end in a manner that won't destroy it, so you can reuse it, but the whole point of me taking these off is to replace them. Probably have to give it a little bit of a love tap with a hammer to get it on. But once we've got it over, we'll just get that to a point where it's finger tight. We'll get this set up so that you can see it properly. All right, so we're upside down now. So what we're going to see is, as I tighten up this nut on the back, we'll see this jaw move up and hopefully pop this out. Whew. I'm going to slow that down for an instant replay. So yeah, be careful when you are using these with the, as I said, the stored kinetic energy. So this is nice and clean. We just need to do the other two. Okay. All right, so we have the relay rod ready to be tidied up and coated. And then our arms. And on the arms, all we want to do is remember which side of the car we took them off. So this was the side that was on the pitman arm side. And again, measure the inner and outers and note them down. So we've got 12mm on that side and around 6mm on this side. So now we'll pop the tie rod end in the vise and do it up. And if you can see on the tie rod itself, that ties the two rod ends together, hence tie rod. There's a lot of sort of cuts, abrasions, whatever you want to call them, damage really to this tie rod. Now that is because when you have an alignment done, the way that you shrink or lengthen the distance between these 2 points is actually to rotate this center rod, and you have a reverse thread set up here so that when you do twist that, the rods both go out or they both come in. Obviously, if it was set up with the same threads, when you rotated the center, it would move one out the same speed at which it moves the other out if you had the same thread pitch. So we'll pop that in the vise. Gonna loosen off the nut. Doesn't have to come all the way out really, but just has to be loose. Sometimes what you'll need to do to loosen up a bit further is just lever this out with a screwdriver. But once it's undone, we should be able to take this tie rod out. So it'll be a little tight. All right. So just move it back and forwards, get it shifting. All right. To the other end. It's probably a bit close. Break open the thread. And then that tube there is all we need to really tidy up. And then we've got new rod ends. Okay, so now that we've got everything disassembled, it's time to give them a powder coat. They're gonna go satin black like everything else. Frankie is gonna help me out with that one. But that is where I'm calling it for this video. So basically, you might notice a few continuity errors. This is actually a few days after I finished the entire stripping back, recoating and reassembly process. But the episode was getting to about an hour long, which firstly, from what I'm seeing in the analytics, isn't really working for you guys. I'm making an hour video and people are skipping through it and really only watching about as much as they would on a 20 or 30 minute video. So it's obviously not something that you guys are keen on. It's also really hard for me to get episodes of that length done in a single week. I just don't have enough free time to commit to this. As much as I would love to be working less and be able to do this more, that's not gonna happen anytime soon. But at least this way, it's gonna make it much easier for me to make sure that you get your next episode in hopefully less than a week. So this will go up, I think it's Saturday in the US, and then hopefully we'll give you the next episode by sort of Wednesday or Thursday. So we'll bring that cadence down for the next episode and then hopefully get to our weekly rhythm again. So for now, I'll give you a sneak peek at the stripped parts before we threw them into Frankie for powder coating. And if you have a really keen eye, you might see the finished product on the bench behind me. Now, even though we didn't get as far in this episode as I would have wanted, I hope you guys did like it. And if so, hit that like button down below. And while you're there, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We're trying to grow the channel. So all of that stuff, including commenting on the channel or even sharing it on Facebook or whatever you guys are doing at the moment, that really does help and I certainly appreciate it. And we are sneaking up on that 1,000 subscriber mark, which is a huge milestone for me considering we're sort of, I think we're only about 5 months into this. So it's really positive from my perspective and I'm really eager to see where the channel's gonna go. And if you are new to the channel and you don't know the full history of Violet Crumbles, check it out here, it's worth a look. And there's also some videos on our A90 there. Other than that, I just wanna say thanks for watching and I will see you next time on the Build Room. Bye for now.